Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. With the recent reprint of Concordant Crossroads in Doubles Masters, and the recently announced upcoming reprint of Arborea, I thought this would be a great time to take a look at these world enchantments and talk a little bit about what makes them so special. Ready? Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about the world supertype. And when I say supertype, that's actually distinct from card type. So one of the important consequences of that is that World does not interact with stuff like Tarmogoyf or Sarah's Emissary. It's a supertype, and that makes it completely distinct. Okay, another important consequence of being a supertype is that supertypes are not correlated to any specific card type by themselves. So to put that into a little bit more user-friendly terms, what that means is that even though all of the world cards that we've seen so far happen to be enchantments, there's no rule that says that has to be the case. And if we were to have a world enchantment on the battlefield that somehow changed from being an enchantment to a different type, that wouldn't by itself mean that you would be losing the world type. It would just mean that you would have a world creature, or whatever the case may be. So, why is it important to know whether or not a permanent has the world supertype? And that is, of course, the thing that makes world permanents so special, which is the world rule. So, if you haven't ever played with world enchantments before, basically the thematic idea is that they represent some sort of alternate plane of existence that you can take your fight to. And so, in this way, they're kind of similar to the stadium cards if you play the Pokemon TCG. And so, of course, going along with that is the idea that there's only one plane of existence that you can be fighting in. And so that means that you have this sort of game rule that kind of encapsulates that idea. And that would be the world rule. And so this is the rule that governs exactly how these world enchantments play out. So you can see that anytime there are multiple world permanents in play at the same time, then that means that the one that has been a world permanent for the shortest amount of time gets to stay in play, and all the other ones go to their owners' graveyards. Alright, so let's take a look at some examples to make sure that everybody is on the same page. First, let's say that I play a Concordant Crossroads, and then after that we play a Arborea. So if that's the case, then the Arborea has been a world enchantment for the shortest period of time on the battlefield. And so that means that it is the one that gets to stay, and the Concordant Crossroads has to go to its owner's graveyard. This is a state-based action. It works exactly the same as the Legend rule does. It just has some different rules about which permanents get to stay in play versus which ones go to the graveyard. Okay, so let's take another look at a very similar example that kind of draws out another point that is a little bit unusual here. So notice that I said that it's the permanent that has had the world supertype for the shortest amount of time, not necessarily the permanent that's been in play for the shortest amount of time. And so to see the distinction there, let's say that we had a Grizzly Bears, and then after that we play a Hill Giant. And then after that we make the Hill Giant into a copy of Arboreum, and then after that we make the Grizzly Bears into a copy of Concordant Crossroads. So even though the Grizzly Bears has been in play for a longer amount of time than the Hill Giant, it has had the world supertype for a shorter amount of time than the Hill Giant has had it. Because of course, when you copy something, you copy everything on the type line. And so that means that you are able to write the world supertype onto those permanents. And so because that process happened more recently for the Grizzly Bears, that's the one that gets to stay in play, and the Hill Giant would not. So, of course, now I'm sure everybody's burning to think, well, what would happen if we had two world permanents that both enter the battlefield at the same time? And you could accomplish this with something like a show and tell, or maybe something like a replenish. There's all kinds of ways you can pick your favorite. The answer is going to be the same regardless, and that is that if you have a tie for which world permanent has been a world permanent for the shortest amount of time, then all of them go to their owners' graveyards. So that's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So now I'd like to close things out by comparing and contrasting how the world rule and the legend rule are similar and different. Because they are pretty similar, but there are a few key differences, which I'll highlight here. First of all, like the name suggests, the world rule is, well, global. Unlike the legend rule, which only looks at one specific person's permanence, and there's only going to be a problem if one person controls two or more legendary permanents with the same name, the world rule isn't like that. The world rule looks at all of the permanents that are on the battlefield, no matter which player controls them. And if any two of those have the world supertype, then that means that the world rule is going to come into play. Okay, so that's not exactly true, because if you happen to be playing a game where range of influence is a thing, then the two world permanents need to be within the same range of influence. Alright, but for most normal situations, it's going to work exactly like I said. The second thing that I wanted to draw attention to is that unlike the legend rule, where the two permanents have to have the exact same name, the world rule places no such restriction on those. So, for example, Concordant Crossroads and Arborea, those are both world enchantments. And so that means if both of those two are going to be in play at the same time, then you're going to have the world rule kick in and make only one of them stick around. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.